This is my latest artwork, and in this video I'm gonna share all my painting process and teach you how to create a blurry mountain effect on the background of your illustration. Hey everyone! Welcome to another Mind Sketch Studio video. My name is 𝗬𝗓𝗓, I am an illustrator, and in this video I'm gonna share all my painting process from my latest artwork. My first idea for this illustration would be painting all the characters from the Fellowship of the Ring, all of them together, and a blurry mountain on the background. So my first step, as always, was creating a couple of thumbnail sketches to define forms and shapes for my final illustration. This illustration would require me to use the airbrush in order to create the blurry effect on the mountain, but also would require me to create a mask using the masking fluid instead of tracing paper. And that's because of the size of the characters on paper. They would be really small to create individual masks with the tracing paper, which would be really hard to do. After finishing the thumbnail sketches, it was time to pick up my paper and prepare it on my painting board to start the final drawing. My line work was based in a couple of sketches I did after the thumbnail sketches. Usually I create a couple of them in separate sheets, so I can either redraw them or transfer them to the final paper. My mountains look really sharp, but I knew they would look blurry on the final illustration. Time to start the composition scene for the characters. I had an idea on how the gesture would look like for a couple of them, because, as I said before, I previously drew some of them in the separate sketch sheet, but most of the gestures from the other characters came out of my mind. My character sketching process is basically divided in two steps. The first one is defining the gesture and sketching the body with the main muscles with no clothes at all. This step, drawing the characters naked, guides me to the second step, which is sketching fabrics and costumes with the gesture and the body position already defined. After sketching 𝗵𝗵𝗂 on a separate paper, I added him to the illustration using a transfer technique. This is really useful when you have to add characters or objects in your illustration. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to have the entire overview of the illustration, especially when you use a big paper. So transferring small parts from your sketch sheets is useful and handful in order to have a better composition at the end. After sketching all my fabrics and costumes, it was time to pick up my rubber erase, erase all my line work, and start defining the final drawing. This is a process I already mentioned. The rubber erase helps me to do not erase completely my line work, and I still can see some of the core shadows and cast shadows that I did on my sketch. And once they are visible, they will definitely help me on a better way later on my painting process. After defining my final line work, it was time to start the masking process. The use of masking fluid can be a little bit tricky, so here are some tips to prevent your bristles to be destroyed and also to make the masking fluid consistency better to be applied on paper. The first thing you have to do is to create a mixture with water and a little bit of dish soap. This mixture is really important because this is the mixture that is going to prevent the bristles to be destroyed. Now you grab a wood stick, like some of those used in barbecues or something similar, and you must stir the masking fluid before using it. You have to achieve the right consistency before applying on paper. you will realize that the masking fluid looks a little bit thick, and as long as you stir, the masking fluid starts to become thinner, which is the proper consistency to be worked with. Now that we achieved the right consistency of our masking fluid, it was time to cover all the characters. Lately, I've been creating all my masks with tracing paper, but I decided to use the masking fluid in this illustration because it would be really hard to achieve a very fine detail on the edges of the small characters on paper. I could definitely try to do that, but I would probably fail because the small details would not appear too sharp with the masking made of tracing paper. Masks already applied, so it was time to move forward for the painting process with the airbrush. Colors already chosen, so time to paint. I started mixing gray with blue to create the skies, and I ended up doing the mountain shapes with the airbrush because I was aiming to have the mountains blurred on the background to give a sense of atmospheric perspective to the illustration. The first thing to do was adding a base layer of gray on the mountains, and I tried to apply the airbrush very smoothly and in a distance that would create not so sharp edges. After painting the base layer, I started to draw with the airbrush a little bit closer to the page so I could define some of the edges that I drew from my original line work. The intention here was following some of the original line work to create some soft edges on the mountains, bringing the sense of depth and atmospheric perspective to the background. After finishing the mountains, it was time to remove the masking fluid from the paper. I usually heat up the magic tape from the tracing paper mask, so I did the same with the masking fluid before removing it. Then it was finally time to start painting the foreground. I started painting the grass with a combination of green and yellow ochre before painting the characters. Then I jumped into the first character, which was Aragorn, the first from left to right. After that, I started painting all the skin tones as I usually do when I have more characters in the same scene. Painting small characters can be really fast, but at the same time it can be really tricky because there are small details that you can't do with a brush, so that's why I used a very thin pen to create eyebrows and other elements. I prefer to create bigger characters on the sheet, but it was really fun to add small characters on the same scene because it makes you think about all the details that you need to get rid of in order to think more about the entire composition. My characters were already painted, so I thought it would be a good idea to add a couple of more elements in the foreground. These new elements in the foreground would be responsible to emphasize even more the depth and the atmospheric perspective from the blurry background to the foreground, and also would make the illustration look more interesting. Time to wrap up the illustration with some small details and some light effects. And this is my final illustration, The Ring Goes South. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and the illustration process, and I hope you guys can also learn something from the tips I shared here. If you liked the video, give a thumbs up, leave a comment below. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure to hit the bell button and stay tuned for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.